Okay, we'll just, it helps me to record the conversation. So I don't exactly know where to start, except just throw the floor open. We can, I threw these up on the board this morning thinking about this chapter, contrasting vulnerability with fragility, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just really interested in your thoughts, what that evokes in you, how you can relate, questions you might have, kind of a free-for-all.
Part of what you shared in terms of being open to humanity and needing to have that sort of self-compassion before we can be helps me understand more why there is such separation, racial segregation, and why a number of my African American friends and colleagues have said like it's not safe to be around most white people because I think most of us haven't done that work, and so we have this fragility and operate from that place of like the towers and the guardedness and the I can't even relate to you as another person because you know I have to protect.
Yeah, I'm too busy abusing myself inside the fortress
Yes.
in which you need to protect myself from you.
Yeah, which just makes me, you know, think about the sadness that I have about how race relations, especially in the United States, are.
I just appreciated what you said too. You highlighted as well that building a fortress makes one fragile against the reality of collective suffering. And I think actively dismantling that fortress is an important step that makes me also want to dismantle my whatever my relationship with awkwardness and race and white fragility and white supremacy stuff. But it's like having actively started that process of dismantling the fortress and embracing vulnerability on its own terms, I think is an opening space.
I had the hardest time starting this chapter because when I started to see how ironic and stupid it is, I could hardly deal with it. Like, once you kind of get that the only thing that works is openness and generosity and allowing yourself to be seen and vulnerable, connect with other people, when you kind of see that that's really the only way forward, then I can easily see how self-protection and all those things are so stupid, and how much energy and time and effort, not just personally, but just on the whole grand scale of things, it's like we pick the opposite thing. The thing that we need for everything to work, the thing that's the most natural, the most wholesome, is the thing we can't bear. So we flip it in the other direction, and we build these fortresses and do these things, you know, that make us miserable, and then you get to be my age and you have to undo it, and it's the scariest thing you've ever done in your life, and it just seems so stupid. So I had like 5 different openings to like, humanity's ridiculous, you know, and I just kind of started all these because I just couldn't deal with the irony of it all, you know, just that whole, like, oh my God, it should be the most natural thing to, and human beings are the only species that can act against its own nature, and, you know, all those things, you know, how ridiculous we are and how dangerous we are and how much suffering we create and how useless it is and how ridiculous it is. So it took me, like I said, 3 or 4 different starts where I was like pulling my hair out, kind of going, they probably don't understand what you're trying to say, so let's start back here.
I think what comes to mind for me is, and I don't have conclusions about it, but I guess there's something to me that precedes fragility, because to be fragile and defensive presumes you've gotten past ignorance. And I think there's a lot of people, I think, that live completely contented lives being ignorant because they've had nothing to shake it up. So I think that
That's
precedes things somehow. You can't be fragile and defensive if you've got no reason to be fragile and defensive. You're not aware of any reason you should be fragile and defensive. You know?
Yes, and there's like this collective fear culture that we live in, where you don't have to have anything in particularly be fearful to have anxiety and have fear all the time. For some, like that seems to be part of our, especially white culture here in the United States.
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to say is, and I want to think about that for a minute, because there are plenty of people who just kind of go through, and they might be the ones for whom this whole thing works. You know, so if you're smart enough, if you're good looking enough, if you're rich enough, if you privileged enough, if you haven't suffered, whatever, you might just be, you know, making your way through life without anything. So if by ignorance you mean lack of awareness, yeah, totally get it. And there's plenty of plain old ignorance too. I think what occurred to me was that we create the fragility out, like, it just made me so crazy. Like, my parents and people that I knew worked so hard. They overcame so much. Then they move to the city, they buy a little house, they settle in, and they don't talk about anything. And it creates an environment of fragility in which I grew up. So I think what I'm trying to say is that when we do that, we transform whatever strength or survival, you know, it took to get out of that situation. And then when we build the fortress, inside the fortress, then we get really fragile because we're protecting ourselves from something that we're free of now. So when I think about how my parents grew up, and when they moved to the big city, and they got conventional jobs and they raised a family and they sent them to school, and it wasn't like they had, I mean, we still were poor, but compared to how they were raised, I think we have a tendency to live in the present as if we're protecting ourselves from a past that already happened, or a future that isn't here yet. And so we just are on lockdown all the time. And when you do that, then you're restricting yourself psychologically, emotionally, relationally, and then you don't have the experiences you need to really grow. So I think that personally, I grew up very fragile and jumpy, and for no reason at all. And I knew not to ask questions. You don't ask questions, you don't. In fact, I had this conversation with my brother on the way to a family member funeral, and his partner was in the car, and I was asking him stuff. Like, since he was older than me, I was like, did anybody ever talk to you about, did mom ever tell you, like, you were alive when our brothers, you know, so the little story I skipped through was that my mother had these 2 children out of wedlock, and then she got pregnant with my whole brother, my biological brother. And so the thing to do in 1950 was get married, but there were these 2 boys. What are we going to do with that? Like, how did that even go down? I don't even know. You know, I tried to ask those questions, and then so my mother sent them to be raised by my grandmother, who lived there for a few more years, and then she moved back to Washington State. So my brother Mark kind of remembers playing with them, so they were around for a while. So I thought maybe he knew more than I did. He's like, I don't know, they were just kids we knew, we played with, you know. No one ever told him that. And so we were just talking back and forth about things we didn't know. And his partner was like, what is wrong with you people? Like, what, how does this happen? Didn't anybody ask any questions? We're like, we didn't even know, we knew not to even think of the questions. It wasn't that we had questions and we didn't ask. We knew not to even think of the questions. So that kind of leaves us a certain, what am I looking for? Shallowness to your existence together, and a detachment in our relationships with each other because of some totally unspoken rules nobody's saying, and we don't even know what it is we're supposed to be protecting ourselves from, because we're protecting them. So I grew up for sure knowing I'm protecting my mother from something, God knows what. And that feeling sort of drove how I developed as a person, but my feeling state inside that fortress was completely fragile, super sensitive, nothing to be afraid of, no abuse or danger or anything, but just this. So no wonder it's taken me 64 freaking years to, think about how to be a human being. So anyway, that's just my experience, but when I put that in the context of white people, and particularly James Baldwin's criticism of white society as being just completely vacuous, and the kinds of things that we use to keep ourselves from being aware of that, I'm like, oh, I think I know how that happens. I think I know how that works. And it makes it even more impossible to dismantle it directly, because you're taking away what people feel like is keeping them alive, when really it's not. You know what I'm saying? It's just a really complex, difficult thing to dismantle, because it's built on this ridiculous, although it makes sense how it works, right?
One thing you haven't explicitly named, but I think it's really relevant to the conversation too, is how religion, mostly Christianity in the United States, is maybe one of the biggest things that I think really propel that fortress that we hide upon. And I think it's just interesting / ironic how we're really good religion, I think, expands you and helps you really transform your suffering to become a bigger, more whole person. It really does the opposite for us, and we hide behind it, and it gives us the right answers, and then it really barriers us to not really have the right tools to deal with our suffering in a way that connect us to other people's suffering and make us more open people.
In so many ways, it's the most infuriating irony of all.
Agreed. I would like to add something as well, because that James Baldwin quote, which I put on Facebook.
I probably just, well,
did you read the whole book?
no, I
from-
haven't.
Is that from The Fire Next Time?
I think it,
From The Fire Next Time.
Okay.
I think it comes actually from his interview on the Dick Cavett show.
Yeah,
Show.
Dick Cavett, yeah.
Did he pull it out of his book?
No.
It's also in a book. That's where I got it. Because I noticed
what's
that
the
you
title of
used
the book?
The Fire Next Time.
The Fire Next Time.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because in that quote at the end of it, it says, what we don't know about ourselves is exactly, or what we don't know about the American Negro is exactly what we don't know about ourselves. And I guess I feel like it's sort of necessary in this discussion to name that fortress we have built and sort of amending living in the fortress and the anxiety that it brings us would require a bit of courage too, because I think self-compassion is valuable, but I think it sounds awfully close to fragility. It
Yeah.
almost kind of gives any white readers the feeling of a free pass instead of the courage to step outside of your fortress. And furthermore, the fact that that fortress wasn't built by ourselves. It was built on the backs of the identities and labor of the people of color, and so it cannot be disconnected from the fact that our fragility is due to, and the way we view ourselves as pure is due to this subconscious, implicit bias of another class being less pure and
Yeah,
in
impure.
lack. And I feel like naming that more specifically might be important in that chapter.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think about the vulnerability, it's the importance of finding, we hear this as kids from parents, the friends you keep is very important in what your development's gonna be. And I think one of the most nurturing things you can do is find people you can be vulnerable with, because it doesn't do any good to be vulnerable with, at least I don't think, be vulnerable with people that are gonna judge you. What's the purpose? So I think it's correct, you can only grow if you deal with your vulnerabilities, but that requires putting yourself around the right people, right?
And even then, it takes courage. So
Even
courage
then, it
there,
takes
and then
'Cause
courage
you're still
there.
afraid that maybe they'll still judge you,
Yeah.
whatever, yeah.
So yeah, to do that second step of courageous, so the self-compassion gets you to a certain point, and then the next step of courage moves you into the world in a different way. And not just that, but opens the field for what needs to be done, what can I do, how can I start the process, like you were saying, dismantling.
I think that's really incredibly nuanced, because I think I'll just speak from my experience, what I did very sincerely as a dedicated Christian was surround myself, exercise what I thought was a certain amount of vulnerability, but I think it was perpetrating the fortress. And I was, as best I knew at the time, I was acting courageously, but it was perpetuating the fortress. And it was only when I got damaged and hurt and kind of tossed out into the greater world that fortress began to break down. And I don't know how that fits in this model, but that was definitely an important part of just being kind of thrust out of what seemed vulnerable and courageous, but was really still quite safe in a lot of ways, and through just kind of getting the shit kicked out of me. Yeah, and it wasn't just the shit getting kicked out, it was through other things kind of cracking open.
And on that note as well, what you said earlier about the environment that we have built in this society being already unsafe on the behalf of the people we're oppressing means that us sitting around and developing developing self-compassion isn't the first move because it's already a dire situation for some people, and I feel like it's a privilege to be able to have self-compassion and try to build it on your own instead of recognizing like the term vulnerability, I feel like is a choice for the people who are in privilege and not a choice for the people who aren't. And I feel like that it's like there was nothing you said in your chapter that I disagree with, but I feel like there's more I would have liked to hear if you were going to use that quote, which says that our struggle is tied directly to the lives of people of color.
I would like to add to that I went to seminary in DC, and for the first time, I grew up in the Midwest, all white, like maybe 2 people of color in my whole school. And when I got to college, I had more diversity, joined a gospel choir, and I was a minority for the first time. Still super ignorant, and it wasn't until I got to seminary until I got to really hear like minority voices being over the voices that I've heard my whole life, like so strong. And we read, you know, Baldwin and J. Cone and like a lot of Black theology. And I will say, I think you have to get yourself to a point of equilibrium before you can go out and embrace this concept. And I don't think beating ourselves up is white guilt.
You have to feel safe.
You have to feel safe. Like,
it's
we
human.
can't help the color we were born. None of us.
That's
Whether
right.
we're white, whether we're black, whether we're whatever ethnicity that we were born, that's how we were born. And I think that in order to be able to do good, we have to have self-compassion, because that's not, yes, it's a privilege, because I know some people are born more naturally vulnerable because of how and where they were born. But if we're assholes to ourselves because, oh, I'm a stupid white person, my ancestors were awful, like, that doesn't perpetuate compassion, that perpetuates shame. And I think that I get really heated about this topic because it is a privilege to have compassion, and it is an agency that we can connect to that no matter who we are. We can connect to our own compassion, which is going to enable us to have compassion for others. And I will say, I got a lot more flack from white people in my seminary for being like, who's woke enough? And it was silly. Like, it was just silly. Like, we're not here to like be woke, more woke than another. Like, that's pride and that's ego. We're here to really make positive, like, make our society safer for everybody. Especially, I mean, obviously white people are safe. I'm not saying we're not. I'm saying, but like, make white people wake up to the fact that it is people of color have to walk into a room and make us feel, you know, like people shouldn't have to do that, which I understand. Like, nobody should have to make me feel more comfortable. Like, that's my job. But if I'm not being kind and compassionate to myself, I won't be able to break that fucking fortress. You know, like, in order to do that, in order to, like, because I think there's a lot of, I think some of these words get, like, misused and put in the wrong context, and I think that, yeah, I think giving, like what your meaning for these certain words is important, but I definitely think that courage and compassion go hand in hand, and also I think being vulnerable and developing relationships with people who have different experiences than us. Because then I've heard 2 different contexts. Like, I've heard, because a lot of my friends who were people of color, like, when we developed relationships, like, they would share things with me, and they were more kind and compassionate, which, now looking back, I'm like, well, they shouldn't have to, you know, I get it, like, but we had a relationship as, like, 2 human to human, having an open dialogue. I wasn't, like, going up and touching people's hair and, like, oh, this is, you know, but, like, we were friends, and, like, so I don't know if that makes sense,
Well,
I don't know if that, I'm just saying, like, I just think self-compassion is important on any level, and even though it's a privilege, it's a necessity in order to make the positive change you want to make.
I agree.
and turning the corner into courage is really essential. And I
Yeah.
don't know that I did that at all, because I'm not turning the corner into courage. So, you know, I'm pretty much saying, here's where I'm at, and I'm like not turning the corner into that kind of courage. So I want to be able to write about that authentically too. The other thing about what you said is if we are not at peace with ourselves and compassionate with ourselves, then all our motives are suspect. So then when we start doing actions, well, and we can learn that way too. You know, you go in and just do stupid things, say stupid things, and make it about you needing to be seen as a person who is
A good white
woke
person.
and a good white person, instead of actually authentically being able to do that. So if you're doing, you know, that kind of damage to yourself, you're, in order to fix it in an ego sort of way, you're going to do damage even in your with your good intentions. So I don't think you sit around and wait until you can do that well. You know, you
Kind
do
of.
it how you do it, but there is a if you can affect the weather inside, so that you're aware of you're peaceful, you're like not at war with yourself, and not trying to overcome that war by your good deeds or your bad deeds or whatever. You're at a more authentic level with that, then everything that you do is going to be from that, more so than
And like you said, energy finds its way. Like nothing had to be said by your mom. The energy found its way to you
Yeah.
to protect her.
yeah.
And if we're acting out of a lack of self-compassion and we're more out of our ego, because if there is self-compassion, we're gonna act less out of ego, then that energy is out there, right? So then we're helping out of that. Still do what it takes to help a person's immediate situation. Somebody needs food, you give them food. But if you're working, I don't know how, like if you're working from a place where you're not having to project or not having to have fear, you have a clean path to give in a different way.
It's tricky to even think about it, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
For us, or for me, for sure. Were you gonna say something?
I was
Jason?
just gonna say something about our generation. Like I think our parents' generation, I could relate to a lot of what you said. My dad's brother's wife gave 2 kids away because that just, you know, and they weren't allowed to ask. My cousin just recently told me, whenever she asked her mom, she said, "You're gonna make me cry." So, you know, so they didn't get to have a relationship with their half siblings until after their parents died 2 years ago. You know, but I feel this thing when you were talking about the fortress, you know, that's what my parents did. We're just gonna circle the wagons and that's it. So, and we watched this movie last night about Judy Garland. Like there was no going to therapy. There was no, you know, oh, I need help, I'm an alcoholic. They didn't do that back then. So everybody in that generation, you buck up and you deal. And that's what we were raised with. So I feel like we're the first kind of like, our generation is kind of like, and you guys maybe get like more because you guys are younger, but we didn't have any vulnerability models. Nobody told us that it was okay. You know, my dad would say, "I'll give you something to cry about if you're crying."
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
you can't cry.
Right.
Quit. Oh, the quote in our house was, "Quit your bawling,"
Yeah.
and or I'll give you something to bawl for. That
Yeah.
was how it worked.
Yeah, same thing. So I just kind of feel like we have to have compassion on ourselves and the fact that we're just learning.
Yeah.
We had no role models. We don't know how to do this.
And it
we're
makes
trying.
sense, like where it comes from. That generation came from the Depression. They
Yeah.
all came from scarcity, and
Yeah,
so
totally.
like that's what they were steeped in as children, and so they were just trying to protect themselves because they probably all were really vulnerable when they were kids, and they wanted safety. That was, and on a level that was good, but then that also has its shortcomings.
Right.
Yeah, it just turns into that scarcity mentality and that, well, I wish I could, I haven't put into words, but Mary, you told me to, or you recommended the book, Braiding Sweetgrass.
Mm.
It's gonna make me cry just thinking about it. But it's written by a botanist and a ecologist and a native woman, kind of weaving these three things together. So she's talking about some of the same things, only on an environmental or a ecological perspective. So she was talking about the different values of living generously with the earth, in the earth, on the earth, and how if you live the life of reciprocity with the earth, there's plenty for everyone. But if you come in with the other point of view, which is what we're steeped in, oh my God, there's not enough, you gotta grab your own and then protect yourself from then everyone
And
loses.
stockpile.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it reinforces and actually creates
Yeah.
the problem that we're gonna kill ourselves with anyway. So it's kind of like that same principle, but it takes a humility and I guess if you want to use the word vulnerability, that the native people knew how to live with the earth in prosperity and in scarcity and in starvation, but still the practices that they knew they had to do it a certain way, because that then everyone benefits, and if everyone doesn't benefit, then and certain people hoard things for themselves, then that creates the problem that we all end up suffering from. So again, the supreme irony of
Yeah.
our stupidity.
I think that intuitively keeps them connected to a greater cause that's bigger than themselves, even in times of scarcity.
Yeah.
Which in times of scarcity, suffering, pretty much all of us just lock up.
Yep.
And I think that's what's the incredible wisdom and just magic of that lesson, is that they lived intuitively with their earth in a way that had an abundance mindset on the highs and the lows, everything. And I think that's something.
Yeah.
Well,
that's a
and
huge
I
thing
like
to
the
learn
wording,
from.
she says, the whole concept of calling something resources is an ownership thing.
Yep.
And so I like the way she says, they're human people and non-human people. So the way I would kind of say it is that they don't really see that much of a separation. It's no, we are all connected. They kind of live by that, and therefore you wouldn't go abuse other people, you don't abuse animals, you don't abuse trees, you don't, everything's got to be in balance and harmony. And yeah, it's a beautiful book.
What's
Yeah.
that book?
Braiding Sweetgrass.
Braiding Sweetgrass.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable.
So ownership, aggression, domination,
Invalid,
self-protection,
Invalid, right? Yeah, invalid.
all these are they feel so necessary to us, but they're so destructive, and we
Yeah,
pick the
ownership.
wrong things.
Yeah.
And to fix it requires now something that I don't know, I despair of us ever getting it, but on a personal level, if we can start reversing some of these things and live more, ecologically with ourselves and with people around us, then, that's one thing we can do anyway. But yeah, learning how to turn the corner into courage, and then now what? I think is an important piece to learn.
I like the word humility in the conversation. Just what comes to my mind is with the braiding sweetgrass, humility is basically your earthiness, you know, your being dirt, and I don't know. I like that a lot better
Well,
than.
not better than, right? And that humility is
Well-
I'm not better than, is that what you mean? You say, I'm not sure what you're saying.
Oh, I'm just saying I like it better than vulnerability in parts of this conversation.
Yeah, I do too. It's a more positive.
Humility, I don't know, humility is I've got nothing to lose, which gives you a very grounded courage.
Yeah, say more. Say more.
I got it.
Yeah, no, I totally, that rings really true. And it's really interesting why I haven't spent a lot of time talking about humility, because I have big thoughts about it, you know. I think that humility really is having an accurate assessment, and without, like, an accurate assessment without judgment. Like
Yes,
having an
I'm not better
equanimity
than,
kind of,
exactly.
yeah.
That's
It's
what-
like, yep,
Yep.
inside me, I have
Yeah.
a whole spectrum of ways in which I can be at simultaneously, and that's who I am. So I'm not on the earth to strive to be the best shining example of what everybody thinks I should be. Instead, I need to step back and just accept the full spectrum, see it accurately, you know, don't be deluded or walk in illusion, but have the courage to face it all across the board, and then go, yep, that's it. So that I'm, if I'm ridiculous and brilliant at the same time, I can go, just look how brilliant I am, or I can just be like, yeah, pretty much I'm capable of the whole shebang. And my attitude toward myself is one of compassion and acceptance without defending myself, and without having to broadcast to you all and to myself that I'm good, I'm stellar, I'm perfect. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So humility in my mind is that place of just non-judgment, so that I'm not having to get weirded out if someone points something out to me that or if I, the shame that I feel if I discover I haven't been practically perfect in every way, It just makes us weird people. And so humility is kind of going, yep. So then we don't have to defend, and we can face the truth, and we can take the action that
I think
we
like
need to take.
humility too, it makes you more curious.
Yeah.
Like you're not propping everything on your own security and what's right and everything. You can just be open. It creates this space where then you can go learn. You can be open. You can be curious, and I think curiosity is like a big vehicle that then can connect you to a lot of things that are going to help you grow.
I remember I had to like rework my whole worldview. It was like my mind was blown when one of my teachers said to me, because I was I want to be good. I've always wanted to be a good person, a good Christian, a good white person, a good good. And my African American teacher said to me, you will perpetrate your white supremacy on your clients. Like you will harm your clients. There's no way not to, if you're not aware, if you're not working on it. And even then we do, like we perpetuate those things that we've been taught, and white supremacy is one of the main things we've all been conditioned with. And so she's like, you will harm them. And I was like, but no, I'm good. I can't, I'm not gonna harm my clients. What do you mean? And she's like, no, just like you have to accept that, and that doesn't mean that you're not a good person or you're not wanting to be. It's not an either or. This is just part of how we be in the world, and that it's like I had to redo everything. I was like, okay, now who could I be as a counselor if I can't be a good person and guarantee
Yeah.
I'm not gonna do harm?
painful humility.
Yeah, it is.
That's
Yeah.
really
That is so
painful.
humble. I love that.
And you can't fix that either. Like your endeavor to fix it out of your need still to be the good at it is
Right.
part
Still
of the.
perpetuates the
You're still
harm.
perpetuating
Yeah.
the harm. Yeah,
Yep.
that's.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's like allowing yourself to accept that, and like, and the humility allows you to be curious and to have the space to explore and really be self-aware.
More self-aware.
More self-aware. Well, yeah, exactly. 'Cause you're obviously a very self-aware person. But it's like, but it allows you the space to be like, wow, I am, because that's level self-awareness on like a whole nother level, which is really scary.
And self-compassion is needed every step of the way.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, come back to that.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you're like, God, I'm such a horrible person.
Yes.
Oh my
Yeah.
God,
And then
I'm
you
such a
get
harsh
nowhere.
people.
Yeah.
Then
Because
then
we
you
don't-
do worse, and then you just don't do anything. You know.
And then you feel so stupid. Besides, like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I kind of want to circle back to what Mary shared earlier about what you were saying about it, humility being a very earthy thing. And like, just thinking about, humans come from dust and we return to dust, and like, we're very connected to the earth. And I think that if we can actually place ourselves in that and view ourselves similar to the things that are growing out of the earth and not above them, then that puts us in our place where you let go of like all of this, am I good enough, am I doing X, Y, and Z like in the right way. It's like you're just another thing that's growing on the earth, and so like rest in that. Yeah, I really kind of felt that with what your comment about humility, and just I think that kind of takes us down from feeling superior. If
For
we
a little
place-
while, anyway.
Yeah, indeed.
But that was a big takeaway from that book too. Was like, oh my God, I just was so taught that human beings are special. We are not of the earth. We are not animals. We're separate from the rest of creation. We are the crown of creation. Like and the kind of horrors that attitude has perpetrated on the earth and everyone, animals, the earth, plants, people. And it makes me sick, just to think about that. And then the way she portrays, the other ways that people consider how they are on the earth.
Yeah.
It just makes me want to lay down and weep.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to come back to a question you spoke to me. I don't know if you ever said it here, but you wondered, is my book only for the privileged?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
And I don't know the answer to that. I'm just putting that question out there because I've gotten the impression that maybe it isn't satisfying to those who are without privilege, or maybe that there's a completely different process that they might experience
Well,
with their soul.
I think Meredith expressed it and someone else did, which I do think even worrying about these things is a luxury, right? I mean, I do think if you're too busy trying to keep your kids fed and stay away from the immigration officers, this is a luxury. So that doesn't mean it's just it could help a lot of other people, but a lot of other people don't have the time and opportunity to worry about it, right? They're too much still in survival mode.
That's true.
And or because we discuss, even think about how we refer to different groups of people as vulnerable populations,
Mhm.
they may actually just know these things already, right? Because
That's
their
what I
life-
was wondering about.
Yeah, so we have to learn things that other people
No,
know.
because they didn't depart from the earth. They didn't
Right.
get where we got.
And we just think we're
Yeah.
above that and we're on
Yeah.
some higher level learning this stuff, and it's like, maybe if you stayed down here a little bit longer, you would know it.
Yeah, because you'd already be countercultural. You'd
Right.
already
Right.
You'd
Yeah.
already be subterranean.
And I don't even know if you go and talk to someone who is quote unquote in a vulnerable population, if they can articulate it in the same way that your book is, but they know
They're
it.
probably they've learned it.
Yeah.
It's been their life experience.
In them.
Yeah.
That's like what Greg Boyle says. You guys know him?
Yeah.
Like his stuff.
We know him. He comes around.
His stuff is so
Yeah,
good
Greg.
about that very concept, because he goes, you don't go to the margins to help people. You go to the margins because you need to learn from them.
Yeah.
And like that's the place where like mutual kinship happens, or there's no service provider, service recipient. It's just like communion. And like, I think him being like a white man, like, I think he's learned that, and I think that's one of his big takeaways from like the work that he's done and why he has been a part of something that's been a beautiful creation.
Yeah, so trying to articulate that thing has been my biggest challenge, like to even just be aware of it. Like, this is just me trying to this is just me trying to tell people how I got from there to here, which is not all the way there, it's just here. And then you don't stop and think, well, because the personal is universal, it's kind of the how, but it's not really universal. It's only universal in the people in your universe, you know? And so to translate that, so to imply that my experience is universal is short-sighted.
Yeah.
But to kind of go, well, does that mean it's not useful then? Is also short-sighted. So the language or the bridge to kind of go, that's part of this chapter, is like trying to deal with how do I make that bridge happen from just my experience, but not have it just be inside a bubble of me or inside a bubble of whiteness, except that, so it is for white people in a way to kind of go, this is, I get this, and you know what I'm saying? It's like, if there's some usefulness to white people to go, oh, maybe if I wake up in this way, this is what it's for. You know, that's why I'm trying to figure out the bridge or the